in Arabic as well. Hamza, can I ask you to jump in and say that more usefully in the other languages?
Yes, of course. لمتابعة الندوة بالعربية اضغطوا على زر أو علامة الترجمة interpretation على شكل كوكب في أسفل الشاشة. المرجو اختيار القناة العربية. يمكنكم كذلك طرح الأسئلة بالعربية وسنوصلها للمتدخلين والمتدخلات. Pour suivre le webinaire en français, veuillez cliquer sur le bouton d'interprétation en forme de globe
button that resembles a globe at the bottom of your.
Vous pouvez aussi poser vos questions et partager vos commentaires en français et on fera de notre mieux pour les traduire. Merci beaucoup.
Thanks very much, Hamza. In terms of the format of today's session, in a moment, I'm going to hand to Hamza to introduce the contents a little bit further and to talk just briefly about what we mean with just transition and how we decided to host this panel and some of the main themes that we hope to talk about today. We're going to then pass on to the individual speakers for a series of short interventions, just outlining some key themes and questions about just transition in their respective areas. And then we'll come to a Q&A where we hope that we'll have the chance to take questions from all of you. You'll see at the bottom of your screen as well, there's a Q&A box. If you click there, you can add your questions in text there. Feel free to write in any language. Well, any of the webinar languages. If you add other ones, you might struggle a little. I would say, please do keep your questions there instead of in the chat, and keep the chat for if you want to comment or to share resources or information that you think might be interesting to the other participants. So using the Q&A will help us to keep the different threads of the conversation straight. With that said, yeah, I would like to hand over to Hamza to introduce the topic briefly.
Thanks a lot, Katie. Thanks for introducing the webinar. I'm going to tell you briefly about the webinar and in the context it is coming. So this webinar is part of a small project we are initiating inside the Transnational Institute, TNI, to reflect on how a just transition could look like in different contexts. And the focus obviously here is North Africa. Human-made climate change is already a reality in the North African region, undermining the ecological and socio-economic basis of life in the region. Countries such as Algeria, Tunisia, and Morocco are experiencing recurrent severe heat waves and prolonged droughts with catastrophic impacts on agriculture and small-scale farmers.
Et les petits agriculteurs. Cet été, par exemple, l'Algérie a été frappée par des
experienced a suffocating heat wave with temperatures soaring close to 50 degrees. And southern Morocco struggled with terrible droughts for the third straight year. In the years ahead, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projects that the Mediterranean region will see an intensification of extreme weather events, such as wildfires and flooding, and further increases in aridity and drought. So, addressing this global climate crisis requires a rapid and drastic reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. But if a transition towards renewable energy has become inevitable, justice has not. The emphasis for us here is the justice element of the discussion. Basically, how can we have a transition without perpetuating the same patterns of oppression, inequality, dispossession, and plunder? TNI will be looking at this not just on a geographical basis, but also thematically according to its various programs like the agrarian environmental justice, public alternatives, corporate power, trade and investment, as well as securitization and militarization. The Just Transition in North Africa project will try to engage with the just transition framing with the objective of adapting it to the realities of North Africa, aiming to enrich national, regional, as well as global discussions around the transition. The hope
على نقاشات إقليمية
a series of long reads, essays in Arabic and English that will be published in the next few weeks. As the just transition needs to be global, we need to be in dialogue with others from other parts of the African continent, from the Americas, Asia, and Europe. And I'm happy that you joined us today, and I'm confident that our discussion will be rich. Of course, we won't have all the answers, but at least we can push each other to consider other perspectives, address some blind spots in the hope to construct effective alliances and solidarities to counteract the power of capital. So many thanks. Welcome all.
Thank you very much, Hamza, for that introduction. And I would like to, for the first part of this discussion, I would like now to hand over to Chafik Ben Rouine, Tunisian activist and economic analyst. Chafik is the co-founder and the current president of the Tunisian Observatory of the Economy, and he's also on the executive council of the Tax Justice Network in Africa. Chafik, please go ahead.
Thank you, Katie. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Great.
we hear you well. Did you also want to share a PowerPoint?
No.
Perfect.
I don't have a PowerPoint.
Go ahead.
I think you won't exclude me for that.
Definitely not.
Okay, so thank you for this introduction, Katie. And thank you also, Hamza, to set the frame of the discussion. So in Tunisia, like I will try to maybe give you some general overview of the situation of the energy situation in Tunisia, and trying also to discuss what could be a just transition in the country, but also what are the challenges in the country that we are facing. As a general overview, the energy situation in Tunisia is quite, let's say, simple. Like for example, the electricity production is reliant on fossil fuel, like mainly coming from gas. We have more or less 97% of the electricity produced from gas. So this is really highly reliant on these sources. Also, since 2008, so we have like also gas production, national gas production in the country, but since 2008, there is a depletion of natural production until 2020 with a new increase this year from a new, let's say, production field in the south of the country. So this, let's say, decrease of national production increase, of course, the energy deficit of the country and what we could say the dependency on imports of this gas use. But I don't want to use use dependency on other countries, because we import most of this gas from Algeria, which is brothers countries. So we could say we are reliant on Algeria in the framework of a solidarity relation. And in terms of oil product, we used to be like reliant on Libya, but since there is a conflict, we are more reliant on diversified sources of oil products in terms of origin. So this was just to set a bit the context of the situation in the country. So I wanted to touch base really like briefly on how like the big agreements like Paris Agreement were received and discussed in Tunisia. But maybe before, just to say that there is a kind of a big injustice, and I think Tunisia is not the only country in this situation, is that Tunisia, as all the region, is one of the countries which will have the most serious negative impact due to climate change and overexploitation of a few natural resources, and especially water. And I want to insist on that because, Hamza, you talked about heat waves, but also there is a more and more social protest because of a lack and scarcity of water in the country. But there is also an international injustice due to the fact that Tunisia is one of the least contributor to climate change. So we will be the one who will pay the most, but the one who contributed the least. So this injustice was not really debated in the country. And I think this is something that's really important to have in mind, is that, for example, in preparation to the Paris Agreement, there is no serious debate at the national level. All Tunisia's commitments that were sent or that were submitted by the country were not debated in the country and were defined through a technocratic process, mainly through technical assistance of development agencies in this case, German development agencies, that completely
développement
neutralized
allemande, et elles ont complètement
and
وأوروبية عندما نفكر في هذا
international level. So in Tunisia, when we look at, let's say, just transition, or what we call here like green transition, since the revolution, one of the main, let's say, reform that was promoted in Tunisia was the promotion of renewable energy through mainly privatization of the sector. So the energy sector was one of the first to implement some sort of privatization in the end of around 2009, with partial privatization of production of electricity. So basically, this was a rent activity with a process of the accumulation of capital, because those foreign companies were just having like a rent activity and just sending dividend outside the country. So all the promotion of the renewable energy in Tunisia was set, let's say, as a big framework under the project of Desertect. I won't go into the detail of this project because I think, Hamza, maybe you will give more detail about that, but this was kind of the framework where the promotion of renewable energy was set in the country. And in this context, Tunisia passed a law promoting renewable energy in 2015. And the main idea was to promote foreign companies, private companies, but mainly foreign companies, to produce renewable energy with a long-term objective to export clean energy to Europe. So the objective of this promotion was to have by 2030, 30% of electricity produced from renewable energy. So at the beginning of thinking this promotion in 2009, let's say the proportion of renewable energy in the electricity production, so it was around 3%. And today, when I speak with you, the situation is still the same. So nothing really advanced on this aspect until now. So at the center of this law was the promotion of public-private partnership, and I'm sure like a lot of people are also familiar with this concept, which at the center of PPP, public-private partnership, is the privatization of benefit and socialization of losses that we as an organization denounced from the beginning when it was promoted in Tunisia, and kind of managed to, let's say, neutralize this law that is really not really used in the country since its passing. So in addition to the law, there was also the promotion of the liberalization of the sector through mainly the dismantlement of the public company producing electricity. And this was more under the framework of a new generation of free trade agreement, what we called in Tunisia, the Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Agreement, DCFTA, ALECA in French. And basically the idea was to let market forces drive prices in the country with all negative consequences that we know, and as you, maybe most of you, experience in Europe now. So at the national level, one of the main also aspect that is maybe what less discussed, but is also important to have in mind, is that the current model of promotion of renewable energy is reinforcing also regional inequalities at the national level, where natural resources are extracted from the center, from marginalized regions where people do not benefit socially or economically, or sometimes even not in terms of energy production. Sometimes they have like wind farms or solar farms, but they don't have access to electricity in those regions. And this extraction of natural resources is not benefiting to the local communities. So this also law is reinforcing those dynamics at the national level. But what I want to, let's say, focus on was the resistance on this privatization of energy production in the country. And mainly this was led by the trade union in the country. So you need to have in mind that the trade union in Tunisia is quite powerful, is centralized, has different branches in different sectors. And in this case, it was the branch in the energy sector inside the public company that really battled to fought against the privatization of the sector. So when the law on PPP was promoted, we had some discussion and we did some training to trade union on the danger of the public-private partnership, and there were a lot of discussion inside to see to what extent they can resist this privatization through PPP. And the trade union branch in the energy sector was one of the most vocal against the law promoting renewable energy. And the main critiques that they have was the privatization of electricity production, but also the fact that all the cost will be borne by the public company, while the benefit will only be shared amongst the private companies. So they released a lot of statements. They also put a lot of pressure in the sector, mainly in the Ministry of Energy. You know, all the Ministry of Energy kind of postpone the put in place of the law or the implementation of the law because of the trade union pressure. They also reached the stage where they even blocked the setting of a photovoltaic production sites in the south of the country as a protest against this law. And as a consequence, while the law was published in 2015, it was only in 2019 that the state published public offers to produce electricity from renewable energy. And until now, as I'm speaking now, all big projects of, for example, photovoltaic did not started yet because of this resistance of the union inside the public company, the STEG, and inside the Ministry of Energy. The last information we have is that maybe by the end of this year or beginning of next year, there will be this big project will be put in place. But I know that the union, and we are in discussion with them, they want to amend this law in order to prevent the privatization of electricity. So we will see what will occur if this will be put in place or not.
Thanks very much, Chafik. Is it possible to wrap up? Are you?
Yeah, I will wrap up now.
Thanks.
Just recommendation, if you allow me. Yeah. So just two main small points saying that this project are also reinforcing knowledge and technology dependency, and they are not really promoting jobs at the local level. So the question now is what would be, let's say, a just transition model for Tunisia. So in my opinion, I think that we need to have a different approach to energy production. And for example, we need to decentralize this decision-making process on those projects to give more ownership to local community. For example, in the case of Tunisia, it means instead of being discussed at the parliament at the national level, this could be discussed and decided at local councils to respect also community choices, but also to promote another type of production and promote more small-scale production at household level in order to make sure that renewable energy serves primarily the marginalized region with high solar potential. This will give more ownerships on the mean of energy of production to household, will be less capitalistic and will need less big private investment and reduce dependencies. And also outside of this household level production, I think that it's fair to have more a public-led project in order to maintain a socially acceptable prices and services, which is still the case in the country. At the regional level, I think that we need more collaboration on research by Maghrebian and Sahelian countries with high potential to achieve popular energy sovereignty. And at the international level, I think we need to have a free transfer of technology on small-scale solar energy production, but also having financial compensation for those countries contributing the less to climate change, but paying the most in terms of consequences. And thank you.
Thank you very much. Very nice, clear and provocative recommendations to get us started in this discussion. Just a word from our interpreters is, if we could, I am the worst for this, but if we could all try to slow down just slightly, that would be really helpful for them. And thank you to the interpreters. I want to now hand over to Hamza Hamuchena. Hamza, I skipped your introduction when you spoke before, but Hamza is a London-based Algerian researcher and an activist, and he's currently the North African Program Coordinator with the Transnational Institute. Hamza, please go ahead.
Thank you, Katie. I'm really glad to be the second speaker after Chafik, because he laid the ground and provided some of the issues we are grappling with in the North African context, not just in North Africa, but in the global South, which is, the neo-colonial dimension of those renewable projects that are being pushed in our region. I'm going to try to focus briefly in my talk on hydrogen, talk about green hydrogen and all the hype that is being around there here, especially in Europe. It is being pushed and encouraged by hydrogen lobbies, by industry, by fossil fuel companies. So I'm going to tell you a little bit and share with you some reflections. But first of all, what is green hydrogen? Most of the current hydrogen production is the result of extraction from fossil fuels, which leads to large carbon emissions and what we call gray hydrogen. Some of the industry and the lobbyists are saying if we manage to capture those emissions using the unproven carbon capture technology, it becomes cleaner, and that's why they call it blue hydrogen. But the cleanest version of hydrogen is the one you get from breaking the water molecule using renewable energy, and that way you generate green hydrogen. But right now, the amount of energy generated from that is just less than 1%. So I don't know what's the hype around it. So this is just a small introduction. What is the usage of green hydrogen? They say it can be a fuel, it can be an energy source, it can power vehicles and non-electrified trains, and can be apparently transported over long distances, either through shipping or via the existing natural gas infrastructure, like the current pipelines existing in Europe or the other pipelines coming from North Africa to Europe. So Europe's hydrogen ambition. So Europe has a plan, and they are pushing it within the European Green Deal, and they are aiming to get a lot of green and clean hydrogen by 2050. It proposes that the EU could meet some of its future supply from Africa, in particular North Africa, which offers both huge renewable energy potential and geographic proximity. And the idea originated in a paper published in March 2020 by the trade lobby body called Hydrogen Europe. They are suggesting that 40 gigawatts can be generated in Europe, and the rest can
explique que l'Europe peut générer 40 gigawatts d'hydrogène et importer 40 gigawatts d'hydrogène de l'Europe de l'Est ou de l'Afrique, du nord de l'Afrique.
Another manifesto, another paper for Desertect, the project that Chafik mentioned, and it's called the North Africa Europe Hydrogen Manifesto in November 2019. Just for you to know that Germany is at the forefront of this, of the green hydrogens in Africa. It's funding a lot of projects right now in Congo, in Morocco, South Africa, and trying to develop this decarbonized fuel for export to Europe. It's funding a lot of research programs in universities like the one in Cape Town, and it's trying to identify locations in Western and Southern Africa. So it's exploring around 31 countries that would be particularly suited for green hydrogen production for export to Europe. So in 2020 or 21, I cannot read the slide. Germany signed a deal with Morocco to build the first hydrogen plant on the continent. And according to certain estimates, Morocco can take up to 4% of the global production of green molecules by 2030. And it can play the role of a hydrogen landing zone. So other projects from the African continent, they could just transport that fuel to Europe, and then things would go from Morocco to Europe through the pipeline that is existing right now between Algeria, Morocco, and Europe. And apparently that one is blocked. Not apparently, it has been blocked by Algeria. So Algeria is not using that one no more to send gas to Europe. Come back to Desertect quickly. The original Desertect project in the early 2000s was an ambitious initiative to power Europe from Saharan solar plants and wind farms all over the region, from North Africa to the Middle East. The idea originated in a paper as well, saying that Europe could provide 20% of its electricity by importing that electricity from North Africa. But after some years of hype around it, that venture basically collapsed amid criticism of its astronomical cost and its neo-colonial connotation. But it seems that the idea is being given a new lease of life in what is being called right now Desertect 3.0. In early 2020, the Desertect Industrial Initiative launched the MENA Hydrogen Alliance, which brings together private and public sectors, as well as science and academia, to kickstart green hydrogen economies. The Desertect proposal is based on a European energy system that produces 50% of its renewable electricity and 50% green hydrogen by 2050. It assumes that a large part of that hydrogen will be imported from North Africa, a kind of a renewable energy Eldorado. If we go to the details, when we read between the lines in that manifesto, the Desertect initiative is trying to divorce itself from the first ideas in the early days of just export energy. And now they are including things about local development and generation of jobs. But the priority is clear in that quote in the slide, that they want North Africa or the African continent to provide that green hydrogen for Europe. If that wasn't convincing enough for the political and business elites in both sides of the Mediterranean, the Desertect crew have other tricks up their sleeves. And this quote is just revealing. They say, furthermore, a joint European North African renewable energy and hydrogen approach would create economic development, future-oriented jobs, and social stability in North African countries, potentially reducing the number of economic migrants from the region to Europe. The Desertect vision clearly lends itself to the general trend of consolidating fortress Europe and expanding an inhumane regime of border imperialism. Such apolitical mega projects, they are basically techno-fixes. They do not resolve the questions, as they don't question the structural problems of the current energy systems, its hierarchies, its neo-colonial tendencies, and even the different vulnerabilities between countries in the North and South. It just promises to overcome the problems without fundamental changes, basically maintaining the status quo, which is basically another remake of the neo-colonial status, where hydrogen simply replaces gas. Because what they are suggesting, as you see from that picture, they are saying, let's just use the current gas pipelines that are coming from North Africa, or maybe build another one from Egypt and just replace the gas with the hydrogen and leave the same authoritarian structures in place without caring about people's livelihoods and their interests in the region. And then there is another thing, that an important point about green hydrogen. There is an excellent publications by Corporate Observatory Europe on the questions of hydrogen, basically arguing that the industry, the fossil fuel industry and their lobbyists are trying to push for this to extend basically their existence for 3 decades, and create the idea that we need this as a transition, because we are not going directly into green hydrogen, according to them. What they are saying, we need to do this blue hydrogen, we need to generate it from fossil fuels, so we need to continue extracting gas, and then capture that gas emissions and put them in the gas fields, the what they call them, the dead and empty gas fields in Northern Africa. It's a kind of, again, displacing the environmental and social costs from north to south. And without going into this, these projects are highly costly and capital intensive projects. They need loans and debts, and that would generate more dependency financially. So just to conclude, I think we need to scratch beneath the surface of the language of cleanliness, green, shininess, and carbon emission cuts in order to observe and scrutinize the materiality of the transition towards renewable energy. Who owns what? Who does what? Who gets what? Who wins and who loses? These are very important questions when we talk about what kind of transition do we want. A green and just transition must fundamentally transform and decolonize our global economic system that are not fit for purpose at the social, ecological, and even
le système actuel ne répond pas aux exigences biologiques, psychologiques et sociales. Nous devons nous éloigner de cette logique impérialiste et racisée. Et nous devons cesser de toujours chercher à extraire sans cesse. Merci de m'avoir écouté. Merci beaucoup, Hamza.
Really interesting exposition of this whole area of green hydrogen, which is quite new to me and maybe also to some of the others here, although I know it's more and more a source of policy hype, especially in the EU. I wanted to turn now to Saker Al-Nour. Saker is an Egyptian rural sociologist. He's currently a visiting postdoctoral fellow at Berlin Free University and the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. And he's also the co-founder of Action Network for Just Transition in the Middle East and North Africa. Saker, please go ahead.
I'm trying to share the PowerPoint.
You should have a green button in the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it should be a green button in the middle that says share screen.
It's not working. I think I tried just one time. If it's not work, I can just.
If you want, Saka, you can send it to me and I can share my screen.
Okay, maybe this is more easier.
That would be great. Saker, do you have Sam's contact info, or can you send?
We can drop it in the chat. I can find it there.
Perfect. Yeah, via the chat. That would be great.
Or Saker, or maybe just send it by email to me and I'll share it from here.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll send you that. Would be more easier. I'm sorry for that.
No
worries at all.
In the meantime, I just wanted to say thanks to those who have already shared a couple of great questions in the chat and in the Q&A. Please do keep sharing your questions there, and we will get to hopefully all of them at the end. So please do keep sharing your questions.
You get it, Hamza? I sent it to you.
You did? Okay. Just 1 second, huh?
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't received it yet.
No? I don't know.
Yeah, internet. I think maybe there is an issue with the internet.
Do you think that it would make sense that we pass in the meantime to
Yeah.
Hamza Lakal and to Joanna, and then come back to Zakir at the end? Is that all right?
Yeah, let's do
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, is that okay? And then we can get the PowerPoint figured out in the meantime. So we'll pass to our two other speakers who will be speaking together during their 10 minutes. We have Joanna Allen, who's an academic in the Department of Geography and Environmental Sciences at Northumbria University. She's also an activist with the Western Sahara Campaign UK and Western Sahara Resource Watch. She'll be joined by Hamza Lakal, who is a Sahrawi poet and cultural activist. Joanna, I think you're starting, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Perfect.
Thanks very much, Katie and Hamza, for organising this excellent event. And thank you, Chafik and Hamza, for your interventions, which were fascinating. I'm learning a lot already, but also seeing how many commonalities there are between our work. So this issue of the neo-colonial dimension of the energy transition, the need to transform the colonial dimensions of our economic system, that rings true for Western Sahara as well, I think. So I'm just going to try and share my slides. Bear with me a second. Apologies. Getting there. Okay. So hopefully you can see my slides there.
Yep, perfect.
Great, thanks very much. I'm just going to give a little bit of history, which illuminates our paper, which focuses on the energy
C'est très important dans notre article qui se concentre sur le système énergétique dans le Sahara occidental occupé. Alors, on ne voit pas très bien, mais c'est la carte des Nations Unies du Sahara occidental. Sahara occidental vu comme un territoire occupé non indépendant. Il s'agissait d'une colonie espagnole jusqu'en 1975, mais elle n'a jamais été officiellement décolonisée. Elle a été ensuite envahie par le Maroc et la Mauritanie. Et
Morocco, so everything to the left of the red line on that map, and that red line is a military wall which separates Moroccan-occupied Western Sahara from Polisario-controlled Western Sahara, Polisario being the liberation movement of the indigenous Sahrawis. So some Sahrawis live in occupied Western Sahara, and some live in the southwest of Algeria, in Tindouf, just in the corner of the part of Algeria you can see in the map there. And then some Sahrawi nomads also live in Polisario-controlled Western Sahara. So you might know that there was a ceasefire between Morocco and Polisario from 1991, which ended last November. And actually, natural resources are arguably at the heart of this return to war, as it was provoked by a demonstration by Sahrawis on the road at Gigarat, a village near the border with Mauritania. And this was a roadblock in protest of natural resource exploitation, of Western Sahara's natural resources being exported out of Western Sahara and shipped to the EU market. This takes us on to energy, which obviously wind and sun are also natural resources. And what we've seen at COP26 and more widely is Morocco promoting itself as a leader in the fight against climate change and in the energy transition. The problem really is that a lot of the renewable energy that Morocco claims to be producing is actually not produced in Morocco at all, but in occupied Western Sahara. So on this map here, we have in red existing wind and solar farms, and in yellow planned wind and solar farms in occupied Western Sahara. So currently 17.9% of Morocco's installed wind capacity and 14.85% of its solar capacity comes from occupied Western Sahara. And based on the planned future developments, so the yellow ones on the map there, we can estimate that by 2030, energy produced from wind in occupied Western Sahara will constitute 47.2% of Morocco's total wind capacity, while the share of solar power generated in the territory could be up to 32.6% of Morocco's solar capacity. So Hamza Hamuchene and I argue in our paper, which was written with another colleague, Mahmoud Lemadel, that these renewable energy developments are used as a form of energy diplomacy that further Morocco's hold on occupied Western Sahara, hence the links with neocolonialism that others have discussed already. We think the developments give the Moroccan regime a kind of soft power that reinforces the occupation because they allow the Moroccan king to greenwash his occupation and also to position himself as a global leader in renewable energy. But he actually has a financial interest in almost all the wind developments we see there, apart from the existing Sima wind farm, which is privately owned by a cement factory, and the planned Harmattan wind farm, which will exclusively power Bitcoin mining. Also, there are plans to export clean energy to the EU. So again, we're seeing links there with the other papers, producing energy in marginal areas for export to the EU, and also possibly to the UK via submarine cables. So the promise of energy becomes a sort of diplomatic bargaining chip, which allows Morocco to implicate other states in its occupation. And also it makes Morocco dependent on occupied Western Sahara partially for its energy supply. And so this networked energy infrastructure connects the two countries together in physical ways. So I'll pass over to my colleague Hamza now, who's going to discuss Sahrawi perceptions of these energy developments. So hopefully you can hear me, Hamza. I think he's having some technical problems.
Just to say in the interim, while Hamza is coming in, Hamza will speak in Arabic, right, Joanna?
That's right, yeah.
If anybody needs interpretation for the Arabic, you can find this in the bottom of your screen. You have the globe there and you can select your language there.
بالضغط على زر كوكب الأرض والذي من هناك تختارون اللغة. حمزة
هلا تفضل.
السلام عليكم. تحية للجميع.
To everyone, to all the participants, and thank you to Sister Katya and Brother Hamza who gave us this opportunity to introduce a brief word about the report that we've conducted, myself and my colleague Joanna Allen and Mahmoud Hamuchene, who is also our colleague. In this intervention, I will try to speak about about the view of Sahrawis and their impression regarding the energy field in general in the colonized Western Saharan territory. And here we have to say that during conducting the interviews with a number of citizens from Western Sahara in the colonized areas, we tried to focus on the people that do not pertain to any association or organization that is human rights or any human rights organization that is interested or conducting work on the extractivism of natural resources. The people, the Sahrawis with whom we've had interviews on
discuter. Nous avons parlé des coupures d'énergie.
power cuts as being recurrent and happening many times. They provided many explanations and reasons for these power cuts from their own view, of course, and that these reasons or the factors that make the Moroccan regime, especially in the colonized area in Western Sahara, to exercise this type of oppression in cutting power, because the authorities of the colonial power tries to wipe out the truth of what's going on in the colonized area. For example, during demonstrations or calls for the right to determine the self-determination right, or any demonstrations in support to people, to political prisoners or political arrestations. These times, in particular, witness or record power cuts, and some others have a different view or another explanation to these power cuts. For example, they relate this to security reasons, of course, from the Moroccan side, like bringing heavy artillery or bringing weapons through the airport, of course, but they try to cut power, so we do not. So media activists or journalists or activists in Sahrawi activists, they wouldn't be able to play their role in raising the awareness of people, of citizens inside and outside the country, and also to prevent us from sharing updates on the websites to be visible to the world. There's also another angle to this, and some focused on this, as that the bills for electricity bills are described very excruciatingly expensive compared to the quality of the service provided. They say, for example, in one of the interviews with the group of them, that the area sees large projects, huge projects, like fields, windmills, and solar panels, and they see that as a means that the colonial power is using it to legitimize its colonization of the territory through partnerships and agreements with the large international corporates, and trying to involve them into this colonial project, Moroccan expansion and colonial project. These are the explanations of ordinary citizens who consider themselves as being Sahrawis without any political attributions or any political involvement. But if you look at this from another angle, or from the other side, Sahrawis who are defenders of human rights and activists who are working on the extractivism and of natural resources by Morocco in Western Sahara. We will see two groups or two organizations, for example. One of them is led by Sultana Khaya, who is a human rights activist, and the other one is being led by Sid Ahmed Mjaid, who these two are currently, meanwhile, while conducting this meeting, she is being under the her house is under siege. She's under cordon by the authorities, and she is cordoned, and she's unable to go out or to communicate with others. And she has been subject to beating. She was violated along with her sister, and her family is living in horror. Their house is being sieged and cordoned by security forces, Moroccan security forces. The other side, or the other party, Mr. Ahmed Mjaid, Sir Ahmed Mjaid, who is a human rights activist and working in terms of extractivism, and he is one of the arrestees. He is arrested, and he is sentenced to a lifetime. And these are very clear examples of anyone who just tried to express themselves on the reality of Western Sahara. So what we can say here is that the Moroccan side has this retaliation policy to anyone who is against their policy of colonialism and extractivism. And this is what we witness in our area in Laayoune, or in the areas that are colonized in Morocco, like Smara, like Tantan, Laayoune. The Sahrawis in all these areas, and even in universities, Moroccan cities, when they try to speak up their mind or express themselves and speak about their right to self-determination and their right to their natural resources and right to benefit from natural resources, they are subjected to many violations. The least of them, the minimum of them, is beating. So this does not exclude ordinary citizens and make the difference between ordinary citizens and human rights activists. This is briefly in the time allocated to me. I wanted to summarize this part that I included in this study that I've had with my colleague Joanna. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Hamza, for sharing those testimonials and those stories from the region. I think that's a really important part of this picture to have on the table here today. Thank you for bringing that. I wanted to now pass on to Shaker and see if we have the PowerPoint going.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Hamza. So in this presentation, I'll share some reflection about the chance and the challenge of an agriculture just transition in North Africa, and the possibility of building it based on local practice, initiatives, and networks. My presentation is divided in three main points. The first, I will discuss the idea of just transition in agriculture from a global south or North Africa. I'll talk a little bit about the
Ensuite, je vais parler un petit peu des politiques post-coloniales
crisis in the region. And finally, I elaborate on the seeds of local-based transition in North African agriculture. Next, Hamza.
Sorry?
Okay, and the next one. The just transition concept, as we know now, increasingly moved through social and environmental justice, feminist, and decolonial circles. I try in my paper, which will be published within few weeks, to adopt a broader and more radical definition of just transition to open the way to develop important political and policy imaginary for thinking about the complex and fruit alliance that will have to be built to move just post-carbon transition forward in agriculture sector in the region. In this context, we discuss the challenge and opportunities of a just transition to propose a kind of a people-based just transition in agriculture. The first step that I will start with is to understand the trajectory of agriculture policy in the region from post-colonial era until today. My work is focused in just four countries: Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, and Algeria. And when we see the trajectory of agriculture policy during the post-colonial state, in these countries we see a kind of a green revolution-like policies with more support to small and medium farmers. There is a land redistribution and the amelioration of life condition in rural area, and the state role was central to build cooperatives and create a state big land. And then after this first more state capitalist, if we can say, agriculture policy, we pass in 90s and 80s to a more neoliberal agriculture policy with more dismantling of a cooperative. For example, in Tunisia, they had a very interesting cooperative initiative, and then it was ended in the end of 70s. And in Egypt, Egypt and Algeria and all these countries go more for a private farm, big farm system, adaptation of an export-led agriculture. And all this now create a kind of paradox of double crisis. In one side, we have small farmers, agriculture, and increase of rural poverty in rural area. And in the other side, we have a big farm that produce to the international, especially to the European countries, with a very capitalist mode of production and kind of extractivism, capitalism, agriculture in the Sahara, in the desert, in Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, and also in Egypt. And this model actually of export-led agriculture policy was enforced by the European or by the unequal ecological exchange with the European countries. This unequal exchange of land, climate, energy, resource, and labor facilitate the extraction of value from North Africa to the European country. So as Chafik mentioned, the idea of unequal ecological exchange or ecological depth is central in our reflection on building an alternative. And this is one of the issues that less mentioned in our debate about the just transition. The last Hamza, next please. The last part of my presentation will focus on how we can the last thing I would highlight is the actual situation. Actually, despite the depth crisis in the agriculture sector in the region, there is an accelerating growth in the restoration of local food system and the building of agroecological and regenerative agriculture practice and initiative. And I assume that this is the base of any just transition for the agriculture in the region. Have to be start with developing and try to connecting this local initiative. I observed, for example, during my field work, that there is many civil society organization working in the different levels. Next, Hamza. For example, there is in the regional level, we have North African food sovereignty networks. In the national levels, we have many small, tiny organizations in Egypt, Tunisia, and Morocco that work on for example, on local seeds production, sharing knowledge of compost, or sharing knowledge on new practice in soil management, and so on. And in my paper, I explained the different practice that I collected or I observed in the field. Next. For example, we have many practice regarding the soil management and the carbon stocking in the land. We have different water resource management and use less water in the very arid context in the oasis in Tunisia, Morocco, and also in Egypt, and also the energy saves practice that all can be part of a more large and developed understanding of an alternative model. But unfortunately, these practices are not generalized, and it has not supported by the state of these countries. And there is still a need to document practice, link actors, and integrate agriculture research center into the development of agroecology locally. So in a more broad sense, to develop a kind of a regional anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist agriculture policy, we need to delink from the European trade policy and deals, develop food sovereignty networks, supporting agriculture and regenerative practice. And all this would not be possible without a kind of social movement at a regional level to shut down the dominant agriculture capitalist model. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sakir, for that excellent introduction to just transition in the area of agriculture, to the really important reminder, I think, that when we talk about just transition, we mean much more than just the energy system, and we're talking about really the change of production systems across our entire communities. And also, of course, that energy systems and agricultural systems are so intimately connected to each other. So thank you very much for that. We've got some really wonderful questions coming in the Q&A. If it's all right with everybody here and with all of my panelists, we're hoping to push on just for an extra 15 minutes or so, just to give a bit more time for that discussion. Of course, we understand if some of the audience needs to step out for other sessions, but yeah, we will hope to continue on. So what I'd like to do is read out a few of the main questions that have come up. There are a couple of really rich questions and coming from quite different angles. So I think I will read them all to begin with, and then we'll just go around in the order in which people spoke and ask you to respond in 3 or 4 minutes on 1 or 2 of the questions that most kind of grab you. And then I hope we will have time to do one more quick round of kind of concluding statements at the end of that. So I will read out those questions. Now I will solicit Hamza's help for the one that is in French as well. So the first question went to the question of reparations and climate finance, and saying if we take up this important idea of paying some kind of reparations from the countries who have been responsible for the majority of historical emissions to countries most impacted by climate change, how would that work in practice? To go a little bit more deeply into this, would funds, for example, go directly to governments, or could reparations be given in terms of green infrastructure or other useful products or services? So one super interesting question. Hamza, would you like to read the French question for me and avoid subjecting everyone to my horrible French accent?
Shall I read it in French or shall I translate it into English? What do you think?
I think if you read it in French, the interpreters will.
Okay. So, selon votre expérience,
In your experience,
According to your
and given that
experience,
Algeria is a major gas exporter to Europe, how has the Algerian government approached green hydrogen development?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So another great question. Then we have a question which I will summarize a little bit, but which the speakers can also check in the chat. But this is a question going to the international economic and monetary system, and saying to what extent in your understanding of just transition is a just transition compatible with the continuation of our current international economic and monetary system, or to what extent does that also need to be transformed in a just transition? Then penultimately, we got one more, so I will read that one as well. But the next question is about education, and speaking a little bit about the role of education in just transition, and particularly whether you're aware of particular educational initiatives or institutions that are really training people from a just transition perspective, and wanted to share some examples of that, which would be great to hear, I think. And then lastly, a grounded question about solidarity, which is what is the best way for someone living in the UK to support activists and avoid inadvertently buying into the kind of false solutions and greenwashing that we've been talking about today. So a wonderful set of questions, very diverse and giving you lots to choose from. And I'm sorry to make you go first, Chafik, and not have as much time to think, but I will hand over to you first. So to Chafik for some thoughts on those questions.
Thank you, Katie. I think the first question is directed to me, but I don't know who asked the question because it's anonymous, but I think the person who asked it kind of suggested some other solution or kind of solution in terms of reparation. And I think that there is no exclusion of solution. You can also have financial reparation, but also reparation in other forms, like, for example, and this is linked to the other recommendation also I suggested on the free technology, transfer of technology, which could be also seen as a reparation of all this injustice that we talked about. But yes, for me, it's both. So there needs to be like financial reparation, because those countries are also mainly also like in difficult situation in terms of economic situation, indebted to those countries who contributed to climate change. So I think the financial one is also important to give more, let's say, policy space, but also sovereignty to those countries. But also the transfer of technology is really important to give long-term, let's say, sovereignty to those countries. So this is for the first question. On the other question, I'm not sure, some are directed to me. I think that the one on education is important. But the question is not, is there any, there are some institutions working on just transition. It's not framed as just transition, but you have some specific schools and education centers who teach engineers in our countries on specificities of the country. For example, I think Saqr, he mentioned some institution on arid region in Tunisia, but also we have also some institution only like focalized on on the let's say the southern countries, western country, southern of the country, etc., with specificities to those regions. So we have that, but the main problem, I think, is more about how our elite is interacting with local knowledge, because they're also reproducing this colonial, let's say, colonial relation with the West, where they always give priority to knowledge coming from the West instead of local knowledge that is more relevant to the challenges of the country. So this is a much more profound question than only having at our disposal this knowledge or not, but how do we promote, how do we use it to have local solution with local knowledge. Yes, thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Chafik. And yeah, I think a really important or really interesting reflection on how the just transition also includes the decolonization of knowledge, of education, of knowledge systems. So thank you very much. I will pass to Hamza Hamouchene.
All right, these are wonderful questions. I don't think I'm gonna try to answer all of them. Maybe I'll go with one or two. Just to follow up on what Chafik was saying on reparations, I think a few things need to be emphasized. Why are we talking about climate reparations and climate debts, or the ecological debts? That is related to what Sakar was saying about the unequal exchange, including the unequal ecological exchange that have been enshrined throughout few centuries of colonialism imposed on our countries. Why reparations? First of all, the historic responsibility of causing the climate change and all the impacts we've seen now lies with the industrialized West. This goes without a doubt. This is scientifically proven. It's the responsible is the industrialized West. You have this point. The second one, most of the impacts right now are being faced by marginalized and poor communities in the global South, as well as poor communities and racialized communities in the global North. So you have a historical responsibility, vulnerability of those the impacts, we are seeing them in the global South. And add to this, that those countries in the global South are in a way, have less financial capacity and the know-how to deal with those impacts. So the argument is not just like a moral argument. It is also a political argument. Climate reparations, climate debts need to be paid from the global North to the global South. So now the question, how, the mechanisms. A lot of scholar activists are thinking about this. It's not an easy question. It's not an easy matter, but there are ways. I think one of the things that come to my mind is, first of all, we need to cancel the debts of the countries like Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, and other countries in Africa and Asia and Latin America, who are burdened with these debts that pushes them to implement austerity measures, undermine the public sector, and not have enough investment to tackle the climate crisis. The other way is to act, we need to revive the climate finance. So the climate talks, they said we need to give like $100 billion a year, which is very, very little. And I think it needs to be in the $1 trillion to the global South. This needs to happen not as debts or as loans, but as grants, transfer of wealth to the global South. But then the question comes, would this money go to the marginalized and the most impacted communities? And I think this is a difficult one. I don't know how. And I agree with Chafik on the decentralizing of the decision making. I think we need to push that inside our countries so that money would go directly to local communities to resolve those issues and address the climate crisis. So I think these are just a few avenues, and reparations are not just about financial reparations or money. We need to repair the system. We need to challenge, the hierarchies, the structures of power. We need to see beyond capitalism and to fight for democracy, not in the bourgeois or the liberal sense in our countries. So just transition needs to take into account all of this. I'll stop here on that question, but I'll try to answer quickly, Katie, the question on Algeria regarding Algeria right now, because it's my home country and it is relying on oil and gas. It's one of the biggest producers of oil and gas in the continent. It's the third largest provider of gas to Europe. It has a good infrastructure when it comes to the petrochemical industry. There are gas pipelines connecting Algeria to Europe, and even LNG, liquefied natural gas facilities with shipping and so on. To say it bluntly, the Algerian regime is not, Algerian military regime is not thinking about the transition at all. There are no projects or even thinking or serious thinking about what would happen when Europe stops importing gas from Algeria. I think the Algerian decision makers are betting that Europe and the global north, or maybe other industrialized nations or developing countries in Asia, would continue importing gas. And that's why the question of that hype around hydrogen, I think the fossil fuel gas industry are thinking, no, we're gonna continue in the next 3 decades extracting gas from Algeria, from Libya and other countries. So yeah, the Algerian regime will at least buy its survival. But the question here is about the democratic ownership of that transition. Who owns? Is it the Algerian people? Right now, it's not. The Algerian people do not have sovereignty over their natural resources. So in the Algerian context, a just transition means a fierce democratic struggle, as well as challenging those neo-colonial schemes that would see Algeria maybe as one of the providers of Europe, either green hydrogen or electricity from solar, because Algeria is a hot and sunny country. It has a big desert. There is a huge potential for Algeria to become a big provider of solar plants and even wind. But would that benefit the Algerians? That remains to be answered. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Hamza. And I will pass now to Joanna and also to Hamza Lakal to speak to the questions of their choice.
Hamza, do you want to go first or should I go? I'll go. Okay. So I'll answer the question about how people in the UK can support activists and avoid buying into problematic green energy. So with reference to Western Sahara, I think UK citizens as individuals can target problematic companies. So for example, renewable energy developments in Western Sahara have gone hand in hand with fossil fuel developments. So selling off oil fields, both onshore and offshore. And actually the first company to drill offshore and onshore in Western Sahara, they were both British companies. Cairn Energy, based in Edinburgh, and Sanlion, which is British-Irish, based in Dublin, I believe, but listed on the London Stock Exchange. And with, sorry, I'm speaking fast again. So with both of those companies and other oil companies that have been given exploration rights,
des droits d'exploitation dans le
العمل في الصحراء الغربية من الحكومة المغربية، وكلها قد غادرت الصحراء الغربية الآن.
So contacting UK companies, the major shareholders of those companies, and raising your reservations with them. Often major shareholders will have dedicated ethical teams who will look into these issues, and you can enter into a dialogue with them even as an individual. And my experience is that has been quite successful in the past, at least in the case of Western Sahara. I think this point about decolonization of knowledge that others have mentioned, in the case of Western Sahara, there are a number of initiatives in the Sahrawi refugee camps in Algeria, small-scale renewable energy developments, low-tech hydroponics to grow fresh fruit and vegetables for refugees, all led by Sahrawis. So there's groups there that people in the UK can support. Hamza might say more about this, but in terms of supporting activists, so Hamza had mentioned Sultana Khaya, Sid Ahmed Lemjayed, who lead the Sahrawi NGOs focusing on natural resource exploitation, including renewable energy developments, and have faced serious consequences for doing so. I know Sahrawis have a campaign now to raise awareness about Sultana Khaya's issue, as part of the problem for them is their invisibility. If the international community knew more about what they were facing, the retribution they face might not be so severe. So there are campaigns there again that people can support. I'll pass over to Hamza.
حمزة تفضل.
Yes, please.
He's frozen. Maybe we could. Oh.
No, I think he's not. He's not frozen. Yeah.
Not
حمزة تفضل جيب على الأسئلة حابب تتكلم.
Yes, Mr. Hamza, if you want to answer the question. Mr. Hamza Lakhal, please, the floor is yours.
الميكروفون. It works now. Yeah.
Hi. Sorry, because you know the connection here is so feeble. I just want to know the question, what it was. I didn't hear it.
We had a couple of different questions. You can also see them in the Q&A box, but
okay.
and yeah, you're welcome to pick which is most relevant, but the main ones were about what reparations could look like, about the role of education in the just transition, about the necessary kind of transformation of the economic, financial, monetary system for a just transition. Yeah, and then about what activists in the UK can do to support activists in North Africa. So it's a lot of questions, I know, for a few minutes, but if you pick one or two that you'd like to add some comments on, that would be wonderful.
Okay. سأتحدث باللغة العربية.
I will speak in Arabic. So first of all, I want to stress on one point, or just mention one point, which is the Western Sahara as a region within the North African region, or within North Africa, has specificities because it is yet colonized. So the Sahrawis are still do not understand what the word transition means, because transition for them means to get independence first, to be free or liberated first, and then they will be concerned with other topics and issues. That's why all I can focus on when it comes to our role, or the role, sorry, of the British people to support us, or from other countries to support us, what they can do for us is just to raise awareness. Like, for example, raising awareness in Great Britain or in Asia or in America and even in Africa, is to raise awareness about what is happening in the Western Sahara. It is a big issue. It is a colonization issue. It is the issue of a people that has been waiting for more than 30 years to be able to determine its future. And this is a right that is endowed with all people. It is a legitimate right, and this right has been procrastinated. We've not got our right yet. So we have a continuous conflict, and that means that the Sahrawis are voiceless now. That's why any researcher, any activist, or any person interested in our issues speaking about us, that would help us. All that they can do, at least as far as I'm concerned, is to make people in their regions know what's the reality of what's happening in the Western Sahara. It's just to raise awareness about Sahrawis' situations and conditions of life and what's happening to the activists in Western Sahara, in the refugee camps in Algeria or in the Western Sahara in general.
Thank you very much, Hamza. Thanks for that call for solidarity and for learning about it and understanding and talking about this kind of urgent, not kind of urgent, this extremely urgent issue. I would like now to pass to Sakar for the final response on final response on these questions. And I hope we'll have time for a super quick final round with just a few words each in conclusion.
Okay, I just try to give some thought about the idea of the role of knowledge and how decolonize the knowledge and rethinking to integrate the indigenous and local knowledge within our frame of reference about how to deal with natural resources and how we can don't take it as a granted. I don't want to make it as a kind of nostalgical way of dealing with the nature, but as something that we can examine. And also the idea of the alternative ways of learning and farmer to farmer way of learning. For example, the popular or a kind of popular academies regarding agroecology, the local initiative around this issue. All this create a new form of knowledge sharing and knowledge production from bottom to up. And this is very important in something like agroecology, because as we know, it's not only a social movement or a practice, but it's also a scientific discipline. So we need researchers and research center to integrate within this dynamics to test and develop the local-based solution to our problems vis-a-vis land degradation, amelioration of solar capacity to carbon stock, or regenerate the soil and reserve the water in a zone which is very high, which have the highest level of aridity, I think, and during the second 50 years, we will be more and more in a very difficult situation. So we need local knowledge and knowledge production for survive and for cope with this, and all this need fund and need a kind of respect of scientific relation between researcher from south and north, and also of course the local farmers and communities. That's it.
Thank you very much, Sakar. Thank you. Right. Wonderful. I see officially at our official end time, but as I said, we will push on for a couple of more minutes. And what I wanted to do was to give each of the panelists just an opportunity to say a couple of closing words. So really just a minute or two of wrapping up any big points that have been sparked while listening to your other speakers respond to the questions. And I would particularly invite you, if you have some thoughts on the kinds of alliances and networks and actors who are especially key in building just transition in your region, I would be especially interested to hear some of those thoughts. Some, of course, have already been shared. So I will go around once more in a slightly modified order, but I will start with Chafik again to share some final concluding thoughts.
No, you said we'll change order, no?
After you.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, I just want to emphasize the fact that and I want just maybe to take the opportunity to use what Saqar said, because he mentioned one sector which is really important, where in this region in North Africa we did some mistakes in terms of how to approach let's say the reform of the agricultural sector. So I think this is an opportunity to learn from our mistakes. You mentioned, Saqar, what we did in cooperative in Tunisia, etc. But we need to learn from these experiences, because this transition on energy transition, but also all the climate change negative impact will have like very huge consequences on our countries, and we are already feeling the impact. And this could only get worse and worse. So I think that we need to learn from our lessons, but also in terms of alliances, I think we need to strengthen what we are already doing. You know, on this aspect, on the food sovereignty aspect, we're already building some networks at the regional level. But I think that we can do more in connecting our struggles, but also in promoting local knowledge, as was also mentioned by Saqar. So I think there is still a lot to do in the region. There is a lot to do by ourselves, I think, but also there is a lot to do in solidarity with all the struggles at the global level. So I think this is something I wanted just to end on this, and happy to continue this discussion with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chafik. I'll pass now to Hamza Lakal and to Joanna.
Okay. Shall I go, Hamza? Okay.
Yeah, go.
Okay. Yeah. So it seems across all the talks, the Europe, the EU is playing an outrageous role, and so I suppose as a European, I can say that citizens of Europe need to play a role in holding our representatives to account and companies based here to account. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
أود في البداية هل الصوت مسموع؟
Do you hear me? Just to make sure that you are hearing me anyway.
الصوت مسموع؟ تفضل حمزة مسموع.
مسموع حمزة. مسموع.
We hear you, Hamza. You can go on. All right. Okay. First of all, I would like to thank all the participants and all the spectators also for this fruitful discussion that we benefited from it a lot, from the different subjects that you have mentioned, and also what are the basic subjects in North Africa. And since I'm a North African also from the Western Sahara, I am so glad also to share with you what are the updates that are happening in the Western Sahara, and also what are the violations that what are the violations in her population, I mean the population of the Western Sahara, and also the violation of its human resources. And I think that the people all over the world and in North Africa may shed light on what is happening of violations in West Sahara. So I would be thankful to you if you can shed light to your communities on what's happening and how we are victims of those violations in the Western Sahara. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Hamza. I'll pass to Sakar.
Yeah, yeah. I'd like to conclude with the emphasis on the importance of regional social movement around food sovereignty, and this is something that we started already by building a North African food sovereignty network, and I would like to make it more dynamics and integrate many a lot of small farmers or cooperatives around the region to just create this, to just push to agroecological social movement in our region, from our region, and for our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will pass to Hamza Hamuchena, but before I do, maybe just a quick word of thanks from me to all of the panelists for these really great and insightful contributions, which I think have been just amazing to get this conversation started, and which, as we mentioned, several of these contributions will also be the basis of publications, which you'll be able to access in the coming weeks, and Hamza can say a little bit more about that. Just a thank you as well to the interpreters for their patience with my hyperspeed talking, but also for making it possible for us to have this conversation in several different languages. And thank you for everybody joining to listen. To Hamza.
Thanks, Katie, for this. Yeah, this has been a fascinating conversation. Yeah, I really enjoyed being in this panel with my comrades and colleagues. Just to answer your question regarding what kind of alliances and solidarities we need to build. As I said previously, that just transition needs to be global. Of course, it's going to look different in different contexts, but it needs to be global. So international solidarities are important. Solidarities with other people and communities in the global south are important. And as well, solidarities and creating alliances regionally and nationally that goes beyond the rural and urban divide. It should be a continent. Sakar focused on talking about agroecology and small-scale farmers. Small-scale farmers, fisher folks, agro-pastoralists need to be part of that just transition. They need to be involved. The solutions we are proposing need to work for them as well. They need to shape them. They need to have a say in those policies, as well as the workers in the fossil fuel industry and the extractive sector. A just transition cannot happen without them. We cannot just say, let's stop all the extractive industry and all of them become jobless. We need to create those green jobs. And that necessitates big financing. That needs public financing, needs tax justice, needs transfer of wealth from the global north to the south, need free transfer of technology, and so on. But transition is a process of navigating contradiction. It's not going to be easy. We're going to make mistakes. Maybe there will be setbacks. We will struggle, but we will advance. And I think in this process, we must accompany each other. Transition won't be without conflicts and without tensions, but it is a process that is not linear, and it's not entirely predictable, but is one that can made be with care, solidarity, and justice. We need to have that robust and radical vision of that transition that sees environmental destruction, capitalist extraction, imperialist violence, inequality, exploitation, and marginalization as simultaneous effect of one global system, which must be transformed. And this needs to be seen along, the axis of race, class, and gender, and colonial history. Basically, if we have solutions that try to address only one single dimension, let's say just the environmental catastrophe, in isolation from the social, cultural, and economic structure, will inevitably remain false solution. It is important to bear in mind that the transition needs to work for everybody. I put a link in the chat for a great report that TNI, the Transnational Institute, published on just transition, where we put forward some important principles on that just transition. And I wanted just to go through them quickly, but it's really worth it reading that report. We say that just transition looks different in different places. We cannot just copy and paste solutions from this country to the other. A transition might look different in Algeria and Senegal. It might be completely different between France and Egypt. And even within the country, it might look different in northern parts compared with southern parts. Just transition is a class issue. We need to have a class analysis. Who will be shaping this transition? Who will be taking it forward? Who owns what? Who benefits from what? And who is being excluded and marginalized? Just transition is a gender issue. We live in a patriarchal system after all. So if we really need to have that just transition, we need to address the patriarchy, where women receive also the burdens of the climate crisis in various settings. Just transition is an anti-racist framework. Just transition is about more than just the climate. We're not just talking about the climate. There are other ecological crises taking place. There is pollution, there is destructions of natural resources, exhaustion of land, extinction of species. There are a lot of other issues that we need to talk about. Just transition is about deepening democracy, and this is a very important element. And I would add that just transition is about decolonizing our political and economic system. Anyway, I'll finish here. I just want to thank the COP26 Coalition for organizing this amazing People Summit that started today. I'm here in Glasgow. I attended a few events this morning. I'm going to attend a few more in the next physical events, but there are also a rich online program, which is, I really encourage you to go and see that. Really thanks for all our interpreters that did a great job. And thanks for all the panelists and for Katie for facilitating this discussion and for all the technical support that we had today. Thank you all for being here and enriching the discussion. Let's continue the struggle. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hamza. And just on behalf of the COP26 Coalition, I'd like to say it was my absolute pleasure to be here for this session. It was truly incredible. I really enjoyed listening to all the speakers and the questions that came in from the audience as well. Super amazing. Yes, as Hamza said, we have started both our in-person and digital People Summit today. So you can find online all of the sessions that we have coming up over the next couple of days. So thank you to everybody. I'm going to end this meeting now, and we can all get off Zoom for a little bit of our day. But thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Bye bye.